Rain pattered against the windows of the downtown Seattle apartment as Mike Chen sat at his desk, sipping coffee from his favorite chipped mug. As a software engineer at a leading tech company, staying organized was crucial, and today's task was simple: find last year's tax documents for his accountant. He and his wife, Linda, had shared a cloud storage account for years. It just made sense, being married for 15 years and all. The familiar blue folders filled his screen as he clicked through their digital filing system. Tax documents, vacation photos, work presentations, everything had its place. But then something caught his eye. A folder he didn't recognize, tucked away in a subfolder marked Work Projects 2023. Mike's cursor hovered over it for a moment. He wasn't the snipping type, but this was their shared storage after all. With a quick double-click, the folder opened, and his world shifted on its axis. Photos filled his screen, dozens of them. Recent ones too, all featuring his wife Linda. But these weren't ordinary photos. In them, she was hugging two young boys he'd never seen before, maybe around 12 years old. They were standing in front of a house he didn't recognize, with Linda looking every bit like a proud mom. Her smile was the same one she'd worn at their anniversary dinner just last week. Mike's coffee grew cold as he clicked through more photos. There was Linda at what looked like a school play, beaming from the audience. Another showed her helping the boys with homework at an unfamiliar kitchen table. In every picture, they looked like a normal, happy family, except Mike had no idea who these children were. His hands started shaking as he noticed the dates on the photos. Some were from just 2 weeks ago, when Linda was supposedly at a business conference in Portland. Come to think of it, she'd been going to Portland a lot lately, at least once or twice a month for the past, well, for as long as he could remember. The sound of a car door slamming outside made him jump. Linda wasn't supposed to be home for hours. She was at a client meeting across town. Mike quickly closed the folder, his mind racing. The woman he'd shared his life with for 15 years suddenly felt like a stranger. He opened their banking app, something he rarely checked since Linda handled most of their finances. Looking at recent transactions, he noticed regular payments to a property management company in Portland. His stomach churned as he saw transfers to an unfamiliar account, always on the first of each month. Mike stood up and walked to their bedroom, opening Linda's side of the closet. Everything looked normal at first glance. Her work clothes, casual wear, the jewelry box he'd given her for their 10th anniversary. But now he noticed something odd. Some of her favorite outfits seemed to be missing. The expensive blue blazer she wore to important meetings wasn't there. Neither was the silver necklace her mother had given her. Back at his desk, Mike opened their shared calendar. Linda's business trips to Portland were all neatly marked, color-coded in blue. He'd never questioned them before. She was a successful marketing executive, and travel was part of the job. But now, looking closer, he saw a pattern. The trips always coincided with school holidays and important dates like Mother's Day. His phone buzzed with a text from Linda. Stuck in traffic. Meeting running late. Don't wake up for dinner. Love you. Mike stared at those 3 words, love you. Words she'd sent him thousands of times before. He thought about the woman in those photos, the one with a secret family and a whole other life. The woman who'd looked into his eyes every morning over breakfast and said, I love you, while keeping this massive secret. He closed his laptop slowly, his mind already forming a plan. He needed answers, but confronting Linda directly wouldn't work. She'd clearly become an expert at deception. No, he needed proof. He needed to understand the full scope of her double life before making his next move. Opening his phone's browser, Mike typed, how to hire a private investigator. As the search results loaded, he glanced at their wedding photo on the wall. Linda was laughing in the picture, her eyes bright with joy. He wondered now if she'd been living a double life even then, if anything about their marriage had ever been real. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the windows like a warning. Mike Chen, the man who thought he knew everything about his life and his wife, was about to discover just how wrong he'd been. 3 days after discovering the photos, Mike sat in his car outside a small office building in downtown Seattle. The business card in his hand read, Anderson Private Investigations. His hands were sweating as he checked the time, 9:00 a.m., right on schedule for its appointment. The investigator, Mr. Anderson, was a gray-haired man with kind eyes that had probably seen every type of family drama imaginable. His office smelled like coffee and old books, with filing cabinets lining the walls and a desk that had clearly seen decades of use. "So," Mr. Anderson said, clicking his pen, "tell me what brought you here today." His voice was gentle, like a doctor's bedside manner. Mike pulled out his phone and showed him the photos he'd found. As he explained about Linda's frequent trips to Portland and the mysterious bank transfers, Mr. Anderson took careful notes, occasionally nodding. He didn't seem shocked. Maybe nothing shocked him anymore in this line of work. "We'll start with the Portland address," Mr. Anderson explained, "and work our way out from there. Give me 3 weeks. I'll document everything." Those 3 weeks were the longest of Mike's life. He went through the motions at work, trying to act normal whenever Linda was home. She kept up her routine, making dinner, asking about his day, planning their weekend activities. But now every word felt like a performance, every smile a mask hiding something darker. The first report came after a week. Mr. Anderson's message was simple: found the house, confirming regular visits. Attached was a photo of a modest 2-story home in a quiet Portland neighborhood. The front yard had a basketball hoop and 2 bikes leaning against the garage, family bikes. The second week brought more revelations. Linda wasn't just visiting, she had a whole life there. Mr. Anderson's report included photos of her shopping at local stores, attending school events, and even hosting what looked like a birthday party in the backyard. The boys from the photos were indeed twins, and they called her Mom. But it was the third week's report that really broke Mike's heart. Mr. Anderson had done some deep digging and found records showing Linda had been maintaining this double life for their entire marriage. The twins were from a previous relationship, born before she'd even met Mike. She'd created an elaborate system of separate bank accounts, post office boxes, and even different cell phones to keep her 2 lives from intersecting. "Look at this," Mr. Anderson said during their final meeting, spreading out financial documents. "She's been transferring about 30% of her income to Portland every month for years. The house there is in her maiden name. She's even got a separate credit card she only uses in Portland, never in Seattle." Mike stared at the evidence laid out before him. Bank statements, school records, property documents, all pieces of a life he never knew existed. He picked up a photo of Linda at what appeared to be a school science fair, proudly standing between the 2 boys who were showing off their project. "The neighbors know her as Ms. Chen," Mr. Anderson continued softly. "She tells them she's a single mom who works remotely. The boys are enrolled in one of Portland's best private schools. She's never mentioned you or her life in Seattle to anyone there." Mike's throat felt tight. "And the boy's father lives in California. He knows about the Portland life, but not about you or Seattle. From what we can tell, there's a custody arrangement in place. Linda gets the boys during school year, he gets summers." The level of deception was staggering. Every business trip, every late meeting, every weekend seminar, how many of them had been lies? How many times had she been with her other family while he sat at home, missing her, trusting her? "There's one more thing," Mr. Anderson said, pulling out a final envelope. "We found these." Inside were photos of birthday parties, school graduations, and holidays, years of memories Linda had built with her secret family while building parallel memories with Mike in Seattle. On his drive home, Mike passed the coffee shop where he and Linda had their first date. He remembered how she'd seemed so honest, so open that night. Now he wondered if she'd gone home afterward and called her other family, keeping all the plates spinning in her elaborate performance. The morning after receiving the final investigation report, Mike couldn't sleep. He sat in his home office at 4 a.m., surrounded by printouts of bank statements and photos, trying to make sense of his shattered reality. His laptop glowed in the darkness as he created a digital record of every lie Linda had ever told him. Thursday, March 15th, said she was at a marketing conference in Portland. Reality. Attended the twins' school play. He typed each entry meticulously, his fingers shaking slightly on the keyboard. Saturday, April 2nd, claimed to be having brunch with college friends. Reality. Taking the boys to a baseball game. He'd started recording their conversations too. His phone sat on the kitchen counter during breakfast, capturing every casual lie that fell from Linda's lips. "This big project is really keeping me busy," she'd say, stirring her coffee. "I might have to go to Portland again next week." Each recording was carefully labeled and stored in a folder he'd named Truth. Their joint bank accounts told an even darker story. Mike spent hours tracing the money trail, creating spreadsheets that showed how Linda had been systematically moving their shared funds. Small amounts at first, growing larger over the years. $20,000 last year alone, all carefully disguised as business expenses and professional development courses. The worst part was watching her act normal. Linda still kissed him goodbye each morning, still sent sweet text messages during the day, still curled up next to him on the couch to watch their favorite shows. But now he saw the subtle signs he'd missed before, how she always kept her phone face down, how she had a separate laptop for work, how she never quite answered direct questions about her time away. One evening, while Linda was supposedly stuck in traffic, but actually, according to the private investigator's latest update, having dinner with the twins, Mike found himself standing in their walk-in closet. He pulled out one of her suitcases, the one she always used for business trips. Inside a hidden pocket, he found a second phone. His hands trembled as he charged it and turned it on. The wallpaper was a photo of the twins, smiling in front of their Portland house. Dozens of text messages filled the screen, conversations with teachers, other parents, her ex-husband. An entire social circle he'd never known existed. Mike photographed everything before carefully returning the phone exactly as he'd found it. He stopped sleeping properly. Dark circles formed under his eyes as he spent nights adding to his digital diary. His coworkers noticed something was wrong, but he waved off their concerns with vague excuses about stress at home. They had no idea that home had become a stage set, and he was watching the performance with new eyes. June 12th, Linda brought home takeout from our favorite Chinese place. Said she'd been thinking about me all day. Reality. She spent the afternoon helping the twins with their final exam preparation, according to texts on her secret phone. Mike started following her social media activity obsessively. Linda maintained separate accounts for her two lives, careful never to post photos that might reveal her deception. He created a detailed timeline of every post, every check-in, every comment. The precision of her lies was almost admirable in a horrible way. The wedding ring on his finger felt heavier each day. He found himself twisting it absently during meetings, remembering their vows. "I promise to always be honest with you," Linda had said, looking into his eyes with what he'd thought was sincerity. Now he wondered if she'd been practicing those words in Portland the week before. His document grew longer. July 3rd, said she had to miss our friend's barbecue because of food poisoning. Reality. Attending the twins' summer camp orientation. Each entry was a nail in the coffin of his marriage, his trust, his entire understanding of the past 15 years. One night, he found an old anniversary card from Linda in his desk drawer. "To my one and only love," it read. He laughed until tears ran down his face, alone in his office at midnight. The next morning, he added it to his growing collection of evidence, carefully noting the date and the lie it represented. The private investigator kept sending updates. Photos of Linda shopping for school supplies with the twins, attending parent-teacher conferences, hosting birthday parties, all on days she'd claimed to be working. Mike printed each one, creating a wall of betrayal in his home office, hidden behind a curtain when Linda was home. His world had shrunk to this obsession. Every conversation became a potential piece of evidence. Every smile from Linda was analyzed, every casual touch questioned. Was she thinking about her other family when she hugged him? When she said, "I love you," which life was she living in that moment? As summer approached, Mike noticed Linda becoming slightly anxious. The private investigator's report explained why. It was almost time for the twins to go to their father in California. She'd need a new set of lies to explain her suddenly free schedule. He watched her practice her stories, each one carefully crafted to maintain the illusion of her single life. "The project's wrapping up," she told him over dinner one night. "I should be home more often this summer." Mike nodded, recorded the conversation, and added it to his file. June 20th, another lie. Reality. Preparing for the twins' departure to California. Maintaining the deception requires less time during summer months. His collection of evidence had become a twisted diary of their marriage. Every entry pulled him deeper into darkness, every new discovery fueling his growing obsession with documenting the truth. Soon he knew he would have enough. Soon, it would be time to confront Linda with the reality of her double life. But first, he needed to make sure he had documented everything. Every lie, every betrayal, every dollar spent on her secret family. His hands shook as he typed the latest entry. The truth is coming, Linda, and it's going to destroy everything. Mike spent 3 days planning the perfect confrontation. Their 15th wedding anniversary was coming up, and Linda had been dropping hints about wanting a quiet celebration at home. It seemed fitting. Their marriage had been built within these walls, and now it would crumble here too. He watched her prepare for their special evening, moving around the kitchen with practiced ease. She bought his favorite wine, prepared his favorite meal, even worn the blue dress he'd given her last Christmas. The apartment smelled like garlic and herbs, and soft music played in the background. It was a perfect scene, except for the manila envelope sitting in his office drawer. "This is nice," Linda said, lighting candles on their dining table. "Just the two of us, no distractions." She turned off her phone, both phones, though she thought he only knew about one. Mike helped her serve dinner, his heart pounding so hard he was sure she must hear it. The pasta looked perfect, steam rising from the plates. Linda had always been an excellent cook. He wondered if she cooked the same meals for her other family. "Remember our first anniversary?" Linda asked, pouring the wine. "That tiny restaurant in Pioneer Square. You were so nervous about making everything perfect." "I remember everything," Mike said quietly. "I've been doing a lot of remembering lately." Something in his tone made Linda pause, the wine bottle hovering over his glass. "Is everything okay?" Mike took a slow sip of wine, then reached under his chair where he'd hidden the manila envelope. "You know what's interesting about memories? Sometimes they're not what they seem. Sometimes they're just carefully constructed lies." The color drained from Linda's face as he placed the envelope on the table. "Mike, what is this?" 15 years of deception, all in one convenient package. His voice was surprisingly steady as he opened the envelope. "Would you like to see the photos first, or should we start with the bank statements?" Linda's hands began to shake. "I can explain." "The twins?" Mike interrupted, spreading photos across the table. "Your secret house in Portland?" "The separate bank accounts." "Please, explain how you managed to live 2 completely different lives for 15 years. The candles flickered as Linda pushed back from the table, her dinner untouched. "You had me investigated. Did you really think I wouldn't find out eventually? All those business trips, all those late meetings." Mike pulled out more documents. "Your Portland neighbors think you're a single mom. Your ex-husband doesn't know I exist. How do you keep all the lies straight in your head?" "The boys," Linda whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "They were everything to me. After their father and I split up, the custody arrangement was so complicated. I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid I wouldn't want to marry someone with children. Or afraid you couldn't manipulate 2 separate lives if everyone knew the truth." Linda reached for the photos with trembling fingers. "They were just babies when I met you. I'd already lost so much in the custody battle. I thought if anyone knew about my life in Seattle." "So you decided to lie. Not just once, not just about one thing, but about everything. Every day, every conversation, every moment of our marriage has been a performance." Mike's voice cracked. "Did you ever love me at all, or was I just a convenient way to fund your real life?" "Of course I loved you." Linda stood up, knocking her wine glass over. Red liquid spread across the white tablecloth like blood. "I still love you. Everything between us was real." "Real?" Mike laughed bitterly. "Like these bank transfers were real? $20,000 last year alone, Linda. Money we could have used for our future, our real future, not the fake one you built in Portland." Linda sank back into her chair, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "I never meant for this to happen. It just got bigger and bigger. Every lie needed another lie to support it. I couldn't find a way out." "There's always a way out," Mike said quietly. "You just chose the way that hurt everyone around you." He gathered the photos and documents, sliding them back into the envelope. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. You'll be hearing from them tomorrow." "Mike, please." Linda reached for him again, but he stepped away. "Happy anniversary, Linda," he said, walking toward their bedroom. I hope your other family appreciates what you sacrificed to keep them secret, because you just lost everything else." The sound of Linda's sobs followed him down the hallway, but Mike didn't look back. In their bedroom, he pulled out the suitcase he'd packed that morning. 15 years of marriage, ending on their anniversary, it seemed fitting somehow. One final lie revealed on a night meant to celebrate their love. Linda tried to reach for his hand, but he pulled away. "I can make this right. We can work through this. The boys are older now, they'll understand." "Understand what? That their mother is a professional liar? That everything they know about you is just as fake as everything I knew?" Mike stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "Did you really think this could go on forever?" "Please," Linda begged, mascara running down her cheeks. "Just let me explain everything. From the beginning. There were reasons. Reasons for 15 years of lies? Reasons for maintaining 2 separate lives? Reasons for stealing from our future to fund your secret family?" Mike's voice rose with each question. "Do you have any idea what it felt like to discover that my entire marriage has been a lie?" The candles had burned low, casting strange shadows on the walls. Their anniversary dinner sat forgotten, growing cold on expensive plates that had been a wedding gift. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. A fitting soundtrack for their imploding marriage. A week after the confrontation, Mike sat alone in his office, staring at his computer screen. The divorce papers sat unopened on his desk, but he had other plans. The hurt inside him had twisted into something darker, and simple divorce wasn't enough anymore. He wanted Linda to feel the same pain of watching her life crumble. He started with her job. It was almost too easy. Anonymous emails to her company's financial department, highlighting the irregular patterns in her expense reports. All those fake business trips to Portland, all carefully documented with receipts from her secret life. He attached bank statements showing double-claimed expenses, hotel bills from days she was actually at her other house. Just reviewing some concerning financial patterns, he wrote in the email using a newly created anonymous account. "As a concerned employee, I felt obligated to bring this to your attention." His finger hovered over the send button for just a moment before pressing it. Next came the Portland neighbors. Mike had all their addresses from the private investigator's report. He spent an entire weekend writing letters, carefully printing photos of Linda in Seattle, living her other life. "I thought you should know the truth about your neighbor," each letter began. He included copies of their marriage certificate, proof that the single mom story was a lie. His hands shook as he dropped the letters in a mailbox across town. There was no going back now. The life Linda had built so carefully was about to collapse like a house of cards. The investigators' reports had included the contact information for the twins' father in California. Mike stared at the number for hours before finally picking up his phone. The conversation was brief, but devastating. "I thought you should know," he said. "Your custody arrangement is based on lies." At night, he couldn't sleep. He'd lie awake, imagining the dominoes falling one by one. Linda's carefully constructed double life was like a puzzle, and he was pulling out pieces one at a time, watching it all fall apart. His coworkers noticed the change in him. The dark circles under his eyes, the way his hands trembled slightly when he reached for his coffee cup. "Just going through some personal stuff," he'd say when they asked. They had no idea he spent his lunch breaks sending more anonymous tips, more revelations, more truth bombs designed to destroy Linda's world. He created a spreadsheet to track his progress. Column A, actions taken. Column B, expected results. Column C, actual impact. He updated it obsessively, adding new rows each time he thought of another way to expose her lies. Linda tried calling him multiple times, but he never answered. Instead, he listened to her increasingly desperate voicemails. "Please stop this," she begged in the latest one. "You're destroying everything." "That's the point," he whispered to his empty apartment. The results started rolling in faster than he'd expected. Linda's company put her on administrative leave pending an investigation into financial irregularities. Her Portland neighbors stopped speaking to her, their trust shattered by the revelations. The twins' father filed emergency custody papers, citing her pattern of deception. Mike watched it all unfold from a distance, feeling strangely empty. He'd expected satisfaction, maybe even joy, at seeing Linda's carefully built lies collapse. Instead, he felt hollow, like he was watching a movie of someone else's revenge. He started drinking more than usual, sitting alone in there, now his apartment, scrolling through old photos on his phone. Happy moments that now felt poisoned by lies. Their wedding day, vacations together, simple dinners at home. Had any of it been real? One night, slightly drunk, he found himself driving past their old favorite restaurant. Through the window, he could see a couple celebrating something, an anniversary maybe, or a birthday. They looked happy, innocent, unaware that love could be twisted into something so dark. His revenge spreadsheet grew longer. He'd contacted Linda's friends in both cities, her extended family, even her college alumni association. Each revelation was another nail in the coffin of her reputation. The woman who'd lived 2 lives would soon have nothing left in either of them, but the satisfaction he'd expected never came. Instead, he found himself waking up at night, covered in cold sweat, wondering what he'd become. The man who'd once loved Linda enough to marry her was gone, replaced by someone consumed by the need for revenge. He caught his reflection in the bathroom mirror one morning and barely recognized himself. His eyes were haunted, his face gaunt. The spreadsheet on his computer now had hundreds of entries, each one a small act of destruction aimed at Linda's life. The final blow came when he sent a carefully worded letter to the private school where the twins studied. He attached proof of Linda's financial deceptions, suggesting that her tuition payments might be questionable. It was cruel, he knew, potentially affecting the boys' education, but he couldn't stop himself anymore. Late one night, his phone rang, a Portland number he didn't recognize. When he answered, there was just silence for a moment, then a young voice. "Why are you trying to hurt our mom?" Mike hung up immediately, his hands shaking so badly he dropped the phone. He rushed to the bathroom and threw up, finally facing what he'd become. In his quest for revenge, he'd turned into someone he didn't recognize, someone who would hurt innocent children just to make their mother suffer. But it was too late to stop now. The dominoes were falling, the truth was spreading, and Linda's 2 worlds were colliding in spectacular fashion. Mike sat in his dark apartment, surrounded by the evidence of his revenge, and wondered if destroying her life would ever fill the void she'd left in his. The consequences of Mike's revenge campaign hit faster and harder than he'd expected. On a rainy Tuesday morning, he sat in his car outside Linda's office building, watching her walk out for the last time. She carried a cardboard box of personal items, her head down to avoid the stares of her former colleagues. The anonymous tip about financial irregularities had led to a full investigation, and the company had decided to terminate her employment. Mike felt no triumph as he watched her load the box into her car. Instead, a strange emptiness filled his chest. He'd wanted this, hadn't he? To see her suffer, to watch her perfect life fall apart. But the sight of her shoulders shaking with silent sobs as she sat in her car brought him no joy. The ripple effects spread through both her worlds like a toxic wave. His phone buzzed with a text from their mutual friend Emmy. "What's happening with Linda? Everyone's talking about some huge scandal. Is it true what they're saying?" He didn't respond. How could he explain that he was the architect of Linda's destruction, that every rumor, every revelation, every piece of damaging information had come from him? The Portland fallout was even worse. Linda's neighbor Mrs. Chen, no relation, called him after receiving his anonymous letter. "We trusted her," the elderly woman said, her voice thick with disappointment. "She was part of our community. The boys, they were like grandsons to me." The boys. Mike couldn't stop thinking about them after that phone call. They were innocent in all this, but his revenge had torn apart their world too. Their private school had launched an investigation into Linda's finances, putting their enrollment in jeopardy. Their friends' parents, now knowing the truth about Linda's double life, were keeping their children away. One evening, Mike drove to Portland, telling himself he just wanted to see the aftermath of his actions. The house that had featured in so many of Linda's secret photos looked different now. The bikes were gone from the front yard. The curtains were drawn. A for sale sign had appeared in the front lawn, slightly crooked as if it had been put up in a hurry. He parked across the street, watching as Linda's ex-husband's car pulled up. The man looked grim as he helped the twins load bags into his trunk. The custody hearing had gone exactly as Mike had planned. Linda's deceptions had destroyed her credibility as a parent. The judge had granted temporary full custody to their father. The boys looked shell-shocked, moving like sleepwalkers as they carried their belongings to the car. One of them, Mike, still couldn't tell them apart. Glanced around the neighborhood as if memorizing it. These streets had been their home, their community, their whole world. Now they were being uprooted because of Mike's need for revenge. Back in Seattle, Mike received an email from Linda's lawyer. Her assets were frozen pending investigation. The house in Portland was being sold to cover legal fees. She was staying with a cousin, the only family member who hadn't completely cut ties after learning about her double life. The local newspaper ran a small story about the financial scandal at Linda's company. They didn't name her directly, but everyone in their social circle knew. Mike watched their mutual friends distance themselves one by one, unable to reconcile the Linda they knew with the woman who had lived two separate lives. Late one night, Mike's doorbell rang. He opened it to find Linda standing there, looking like a ghost of her former self. She'd lost weight, her clothes hanging loose on her frame. The confident, successful woman he'd married was gone, replaced by someone broken by his systematic destruction of her life. "Are you happy now?" she asked quietly. Her voice was hoarse, as if she'd been crying for days. "You've taken everything. My job, my home, my children, even my dignity. Was it worth it?" Mike couldn't answer. The satisfaction he'd expected to feel had never materialized. Instead, he felt sick looking at what he'd done, not just to Linda, but to everyone around her. The twins, their friends, their neighbors, even their extended family. His revenge had created ripples of pain that touched countless innocent lives. Linda didn't wait for his response. She turned and walked away, her steps unsteady. Mike watched her get into her car, not the luxury sedan she used to drive, but an old Honda she borrowed from her cousin. As she drove away, he realized that his revenge hadn't filled the void left by her betrayal. It had only made it deeper. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat in his home office, staring at his revenge spreadsheet, the careful documentation of how he'd systematically destroyed Linda's life. Each entry, once a source of grim satisfaction, now felt like an indictment of what he'd become. The final row showed his last act of revenge, the letter to the twins' school. He'd known it would hurt the boys, but he'd sent it anyway. The thought made him rush to the bathroom, retching until his stomach was empty. When he looked in the mirror afterward, he saw a stranger looking back. The hurt husband seeking justice had transformed into something else entirely. In destroying Linda's life, he'd destroyed a part of himself too, the part that could feel compassion, that could forgive, that could love. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the windows like an accusation. Somewhere in Portland, two young boys were adjusting to a new life with their father, their world shattered by the actions of a man they'd never met. And somewhere in Seattle, Linda was trying to rebuild from the ashes of the life Mike had burned down. His revenge was complete, but the victory tasted like ashes in his mouth. 1 year had passed since the night Mike had exposed Linda's double life. The seasons had changed, people had moved on, but the weight of what happened still hung heavy in the air of his empty apartment. He sat in his therapy session, his weekly appointment that had become as routine as breathing. "I drove past our old favorite coffee shop yesterday," Mike told his therapist, Dr. Wilson. "For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to look for her car in the parking lot." He stared out the window, watching leaves dance in the autumn wind. "I guess that's progress." Dr. Wilson nodded gently. "Small steps are still steps forward. How are you sleeping these days?" The truth was, sleep still didn't come easily. Every night, Mike would lie awake, remembering the systematic way he'd torn apart Linda's life. The revenge that had seemed so justified at the time now felt like a weight crushing his chest. He'd kept track of the aftermath through mutual friends and social media. Linda had moved to a small town in Oregon, starting over with nothing but a part-time job at a local bookstore. The twins were living full-time with their father in California, their private school dreams replaced by public education in a new city. "I wrote another letter to the boys last week," Mike admitted to Dr. Wilson. "Another one I'll never send." He'd started writing to them months ago, letters of apology, trying to explain why he'd hurt their mother, why he'd upended their lives in his quest for revenge. The letters filled the box in his closet, a testament to his regret. The house in Seattle felt too big now. Every room held memories of his life with Linda, both the real moments and the ones that had been built on lies. He'd thought about selling it, but something kept him from putting up the for sale sign. Maybe it was punishment, living among the ghosts of his past actions. His own career had suffered too. The anger that had driven his revenge had bled into other areas of his life. He'd become short-tempered at work, distant with friends. It took 3 months of therapy before he could admit that in destroying Linda's life, he'd damaged his own. "I saw a family at the grocery store yesterday," Mike continued, his voice quiet. "A mother with 2 boys, about the same age as the twins. They were laughing about something, just a normal family moment. I had to leave my cart and walk out. Couldn't breathe." The guilt came in waves now. Some days were easier, when he could almost convince himself that Linda's lies had justified his actions. But then he'd remember the look on her face that last time she'd shown up at his door, or the young voice on the phone asking why he was trying to hurt their mom. His friends had tried to set him up on dates, believing that a year was long enough to mourn a failed marriage. But how could he explain to someone new that he wasn't just a divorced man? He was someone who had systematically destroyed another person's life out of pain and anger. One morning, he'd gotten an unexpected email from Mrs. Chen, the elderly neighbor from Portland. She'd attached a photo of the twins at their new school in California. They looked older, more serious. "They're doing okay," she wrote, "but they miss their mother. Actions have consequences, Mr. Chen. I hope you found whatever peace you were looking for." Peace. That was a complicated word now. The divorce was final, the legal battles settled. Linda's deception had been exposed, her double life destroyed. He'd gotten everything he thought he wanted, but the victory felt hollow. "I've been thinking about forgiveness," Mike told Dr. Wilson, "not just forgiving Linda for her lies, but forgiving myself for what I did after." The therapist leaned forward slightly. "And what conclusions have you reached?" Mike pulled out his phone, showing a draft email he'd written to Linda. It had taken weeks to find the right words. "I'm sorry for letting pain turn me into someone I never wanted to be. What you did was wrong, but what I did in response was worse. I destroyed 3 lives to punish you for 1 lie." He hadn't sent it yet. Maybe he never would. But writing it had been the first step toward accepting that revenge hadn't healed his pain. It had only spread it to others. The apartment still held echoes of their life together. Her coffee mug still sat in the cabinet, though he never used it. The walls still had marks where their wedding photos had hung. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the pain was changing shape. "I think," Mike said slowly, "I'm ready to sell the house. Start somewhere new." The words felt both terrifying and liberating. Not to run away from what happened, but to stop living in the middle of it. As he left therapy that day, the autumn sun was setting over Seattle. He took a different route home, avoiding the coffee shop, the restaurant where they'd celebrated anniversaries, all the landmarks of their shared past. In his pocket, his phone felt heavy with the unsent email to Linda. Maybe tomorrow he'd find the courage to press send. Maybe next week he'd finally call a real estate agent. Maybe someday he'd be able to think about those 15 years without feeling the sharp edge of betrayal followed by the dull ache of regret. For now, he was learning to live with the knowledge that there are no winners in a war of pain. Only survivors trying to rebuild from the ashes of what they once had.